Good afternoon. I'm still playing with the new version of YouTube live streaming. It is operating somewhat more slowly than I would like. Let's see. Okay, we have a visitor. I'm sorry to be slow. Okay, so today I've been talking about the archetypes of the collective unconscious, and now I'm going to read a new essay in the Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious, the Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious by C.G. Jung. This is volume 9 small I, of the collected works of C.G. Jung. And in the past few days, in order to prepare you for this essay, I've read a definition of the collective unconscious, and I also did a special essay on how Agsandrew Ocasio-Cortez fits into this discussion of how an archetype will be pushed up out of the collective unconscious. She could not have created the publicity that she has created on her own. That was all done by the collective unconscious, both her friends and her enemies. And that was the fastest starting video of any video that I've done on YouTube since I started this channel 3 years ago. And so it's obviously has a lot of interest. And so in the next 4 sessions, I maybe can do more than one a day, but there are going to be 4 different videos that are this particular essay entitled Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious. And the archetypes that it's going to cover are the anima and the shadow and the wise old man. And we see all those collective unconscious archetypes within the American political sphere in our current affairs. So sit back and relax. I'm going to read the first 28 paragraphs of this essay now. And hello, Joseph Campbell. Welcome. Hello, Colin. It finally got started. It took me a while to get my OBS operating this morning or this afternoon. But anyway, it's going now. So here we go. Archetypes of the collective unconscious. The hypothesis of a collective unconscious belongs to the class of ideas that people at first find strange, but soon come to possess and use as familiar conceptions. This has been the case with the concept of the unconscious in general. After the philosophical idea of the unconscious, in the form presented chiefly by Klaus and von Hartmann, had gone down under the overwhelming wave of materialism and empiricism, leaving hardly a ripple behind it, it gradually reappeared in the scientific domain of medical psychology. At first, the concept of the unconscious was limited to denoting the state of repressed or forgotten contents, even with Freud, who makes the unconscious, at least metaphorically, take the stage as the acting subject. It is really nothing but the gathering place of forgotten and repressed contents, and has a functional significance thanks only to these. For Freud, accordingly, the unconscious is of an exclusively personal nature, although he was aware of its archaic and mythological thought forms. A more or less superficial layer of the unconscious is undoubtedly personal. I call it the personal unconscious. But this personal unconscious rests upon a deeper layer, which does not derive from personal experience and is not a personal acquisition, but is inborn. This deeper layer I call the collective unconscious. I have chosen the term collective because this part of the unconscious is not individual, but universal. It contrasts to the personal psyche. It has contents and modes of behavior that are more or less the same everywhere and in all individuals. It is, in other words, identical in all men and thus constitutes a common psychic substrate of a suprapersonal nature, which is present in every one of us. Psychic existence can be recognized only by the presence of contents that are capable of consciousness. We can therefore speak of an unconscious only insofar as we are able to demonstrate its contents. The contents of the personal unconscious are chiefly the feeling-toned complexes, as they are called. They constitute the personal and private side of the psychic life. The contents of the collective unconscious, on the other hand, are known as archetypes. Paragraph 5. The term archetype occurs as early as Philo Judaeus, with reference to the imago Dei, God image, in man. It can also be found in Irenaeus, who says, quote, "The creator of the world did not fashion things directly from himself, but copied them from archetypes outside of himself." In the Corpus Hermeticum, God is called archetypal light. Where does this go? The term archetype is not found in St. Augustine, but the idea of it is. Thus he speaks of ideae principales, which are themselves not formed but are contained in the divine understanding. Archetype is an explanatory paraphrase of the Platonic eidos. For our purposes, this term is apposite and helpful because it tells us that so far as the collective unconscious contents are concerned, we are dealing with archaic, or, I would say, primordial types, that is, with universal images that have existed since the remotest times. The term representation collective, used by Lévi-Breuil to denote the symbolic figures in the primitive view of the world, could easily be applied to unconscious contents as well, since it means practically the same thing. Primitive tribal lore is concerned with archetypes that have been modified in a special way. They are no longer contents of the unconscious, but have already been changed into conscious formulae, taught according to tradition, generally in the form of esoteric teaching. This last is a typical means of expression for the transmission of collective contents originally derived from the unconscious. Another well-known expression of the archetypes is myth and fairy tale, but here too we are dealing with forms that have received a specific stamp and have been handed down through long periods of time. The term archetype thus applies only indirectly to the representation collective, since it designates only those psychic contents which have not yet been submitted to conscious elaboration and are therefore an immediate datum of psychic experience. In this sense, there is a considerable difference between the archetype and the historical formula that has evolved. Especially on the higher levels of esoteric teaching, the archetypes appear in a form that reveals quite unmistakably the critical and evaluating influence of conscious elaboration. Their immediate manifestation, as we encounter it in dreams and visions, is much more individual, less understandable, and more naive than in myths, for example. The archetype is essentially an unconscious content that is altered by becoming conscious and by being perceived, and it takes its color from the individual consciousness in which it happens to appear. And I just mentioned that in previous readings, we've noted that the archetypes are, you can think of them as dry riverbeds in the psyche, and when we have experiences in our lifetime, those experiences fill in these dry riverbeds and flow down in a certain way based on whatever experience we are having. And so our external experience links up with experiences that have happened to human beings since the beginning of our species. Paragraph 7. What the word archetype means in the nominal sense is clear enough, then, from its relations with myths, esoteric teaching, and fairy tales. So that's what I mean. Those teachings, fairy tales, stories, narratives that have come down through the ages have come based on certain experiences in certain areas of the world, but they're filling in these riverbeds, which are instinctual patterns, which you can imagine as a dry riverbed. But if we try to establish what an archetype is psychologically, the matter becomes more complicated. So far, mythologists have always helped themselves out with solar, lunar, and meteorological, vegetal, and other ideas of the kind. The fact that myths are first and foremost psychic phenomena that reveal the nature of the soul is something they have absolutely refused to see until now. Primitive man is not much interested in objective explanations of the obvious, but he has an imperative need, or rather, his unconscious psyche has an irresistible urge to assimilate all outer sense experiences in inner psychic events. It is not enough for the primitive to see the sunrise and set. This external observation must at the same time be a psychic happening. The sun in its course must represent the fate of a god or hero who, in the last analysis, dwells nowhere except in the soul of man. All the mythologized processes of nature, such as summer and winter, the phases of the moon, the rainy seasons, and so forth, are in no sense allegories of these objective occurrences. Rather, they are symbolic expressions of the inner unconscious drama of the psyche, which becomes accessible to man's consciousness by way of projection. That is, mirrored in the events of nature. The projection is so fundamental that it has taken several thousand years of civilization to detach it in some measure from its outer object. In the case of astrology, for instance, this age-old scientia intuitiva came to be branded as rank heresy because man had not yet succeeded in making the psychological description of the character independent of the stars. Even today, people who still believe in astrology fall almost without exception for the old superstitious assumption of the influence of the stars. And yet anyone who can calculate a horoscope should know that since the days of Hipparchus of Alexandria, the spring point has been fixed at 0 degrees Aries, and that the zodiac on which every horoscope is based is therefore quite arbitrary, the spring point having gradually advanced since then into the first degrees of Pisces owing to the precession of the equinoxes. Paragraph 8. Primitive man impresses us so strongly with his subjectivity that we should really have guessed long ago that myths refer to something psychic. His knowledge of nature is essentially the language and outer dress of an unconscious psychic process. But the very fact that this process is unconscious gives us the reason why man has thought of everything except the psyche in his attempts to explain myths. He simply didn't know that the psyche contains all the images that have ever given rise to myths, and that our unconscious is an acting and suffering subject with an inner drama which primitive man rediscovers by means of analogy, in the processes of nature, both great and small. Paragraph 9. The stars of thine own fate lie in thy breast, says Seni to Wallenstein, a dictum that should satisfy all astrologers if we knew even a little about the secrets of the heart. But for this, so far, men have had little understanding, nor would I dare to assert that things are any better today. I'll just look at your comments here. And 100% says, do you remember the red book is now finished? I don't understand your point 100%. Sean says, I'm very curious about projection. Martin says, afternoon, evening, all. Sean says, the act of disowning our problems creates new ones for everyone to deal with. Yes, indeed. This projection outwards makes me think of the self-accused, right, where we accuse ourselves so we can't attack with ease or bypass but to group. And Sean says, self-accused archetype. Yep. That's an interesting insight, Sean. And 100%, I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean by the red book is now finished, because yes, it's finished being written, but it is very much alive. Paragraph 10. Tribal lore is always sacred and dangerous. All esoteric teachings seek to apprehend the unseen happenings in the psyche, and all claim supreme authority for themselves. What is true of primitive lore is true in even higher degree of the ruling world religions. They contain a revealed knowledge that was originally hidden, and they set forth the secrets of the soul in glorious images. Their temples and their sacred writings proclaim in image and word the doctrine hallowed from of old, making it accessible to every believing heart, every sensitive vision, every farthest range of thought. Indeed, we are compelled to say that the more beautiful, the more sublime, the more comprehensive the image that has evolved and been handed down by tradition, the further removed it is from individual experience. We can just feel our way into it and sense something of it, but the original experience has been lost. Paragraph 11. Why is psychology the youngest of the empirical sciences? Why have we not long since discovered the unconscious and raised up its treasure house of eternal images? Simply because we had a religious formula for everything psychic, and one that is far more beautiful and comprehensive than immediate experience. Okay, so that's a pretty important sentence. I'm going to repeat it. In fact, I'll repeat the previous three sentences. Why is psychology the youngest of the empirical sciences? Why have we not long since discovered the unconscious and raised up its treasure house of eternal images? The answer, simply because we had a religious formula for everything psychic, and one that is far more beautiful and comprehensive than immediate experience. Though the Christian view of the world has paled for many people, the symbolic treasure rooms of the East are still full of marvels that can nourish for a long time to come the passion for show and new clothes. What is more, these images, be they Christian or Buddhist or what you will, are lovely, mysterious, richly intuitive. Naturally, the more familiar we are with them, the more does constant usage polish them smooth, so that what remains is only banal superficiality and meaningless paradox. The mystery of the virgin birth, or the homoousia of the Son with the Father, or the Trinity, which is nevertheless not a triad, these no longer lend wings to any philosophical fancy. They have stiffened into mere objects of belief. So it is not surprising if the religious need, the believing mind, and the philosophical speculations of the educated European are attracted by the symbols of the East, not symbols of the yeast. Okay, let me start that again. So it is not surprising if the religious need, the believing mind, and the philosophical speculations of the educated European are attracted by the symbols of the East, those grandiose conceptions of divinity in India, and the abysms of Taoist philosophy in China. Just as once before the heart and mind of men of antiquity were gripped by Christian ideas. There are many Europeans who began by surrendering completely to the influence of the Christian symbol until they landed themselves in Kierkegaardian neurosis, or whose relation to God, owing to the progressive impoverishment of symbolism, developed into an unbearably sophisticated I-U relationship, only to fall victims in their turn to the magic and novelty of Eastern symbolism. This surrender is not necessarily a defeat, rather it proves the receptiveness and vitality of the religious sense. We can observe much of the same thing in the educated Oriental, who not infrequently feels drawn to the Christian symbol, or to the science that is so unsuited to the Oriental mind, and even develops an enviable understanding of them. That people should succumb to these eternal images is entirely normal. In fact, it is what images are for. They are meant to attract, to convince, to fascinate, and to overpower. They are created out of the primal stuff of revelation and reflect the ever-unique experience of divinity. That is why they always give man a premonition of the divine, while at the same time safeguarding him from immediate experience of it. Thanks to the labors of the human spirit over the centuries, these images have become embedded in the comprehensive system of thought that ascribes an order to the world and are at the same time represented by a mighty, far-spread, and venerable institution called the Church. And Sean says, do you think sin needs a prison or a room? That is a very good question. I think it depends on the situation and the terrain. Because, as I was saying the other night, with the Ten Commandments, we have thou shalt not kill. Now that sounds like a very emphatic, logical rule that you have to follow all the time. But if you follow that all the time, then you can't go to the grocery store, because there's nothing that you can buy at the grocery store except garden implements, maybe. There's no food you can buy at the grocery store that wasn't once alive and that hasn't been killed by a human being. And Martin says, symbols of the yeast mayor. Yeah, there you go. The yeast helps sometimes. You get those images then. And Sean says, someplace where the drops snarl, or someplace where the dogs snarl at us and seek to kill joy. And sometimes they do, yeah. I'm not trying to kill any joy here. I'm just trying to give you things to find your own joy with. Okay, so paragraph 12. I can best illustrate my meaning by taking as an example the Swiss mystic and hermit, Brother Nicholas of Fleu, who has recently been canonized. Probably his most important religious experience was the so-called Trinity vision, which preoccupied him to such an extent he painted it and had it painted on the wall of his cell. The painting is still preserved in the parish church at Saxhelm. It is a mandala divided into 6 parts, and in the center is the crowned countenance of God. Now we know that Brother Klaus investigated the nature of his vision with the help of an illustrated devotional booklet by a German mystic, and that he struggled to get his original experience into a form he could understand. He occupied himself with it for years. This is what I call the elaboration of the symbol. His reflections on the nature of the vision, influenced as they were by the mystic diagrams he used as a guiding thread, inevitably led him to the conclusions that he must have gazed upon the Holy Trinity itself, the summum bonum, eternal love. This is borne out by the expurgated version now at Saxhelm. The original experience, however, was entirely different. In his ecstasy, there was revealed to Brother Klaus a sight so terrible that his own countenance was changed by it. So much so, indeed, that people were terrified and felt afraid of him. What he had seen was a vision of the utmost intensity. Wolflin, who's Wolflin? Just a minute. Footnote, Wolflin, Heinrich Wolflin, also called by the Latin form Lupulus, born 1470, humanist and director of Latin studies at Bern, cited by Fritz Blank in Bruder Klaus von Fleu. Okay, so Wolflin, our oldest source, writes as follows, quote, all who came to him were filled with terror at the first glance. As to the cause of this, he himself used to say that he had seen a piercing light resembling a human face. At the sight of it, he feared that his heart would burst into little pieces. Therefore, overcome with terror, he instantly turned his face away and fell to the ground, and that was the reason why his face was now terrible to others. The vision has rightly been compared with the one in Revelation 1:13 and following, that strange apocalyptic Christ image, which for sheer gruesomeness and singularity is surpassed only by the monstrous 7-eyed lamb with 7 horns, Revelation 5:6 and following. It is certainly very difficult to see what is the relationship between this figure and the Christ of the Gospels. Hence, Brother Klaus's vision was interpreted in quite a definite way by the earliest sources. In 1508, the humanist Karl Bovelus, Charles de Boele, I guess, wrote to a friend, "I wish to tell you of a vision which appeared to him in the sky on a night when the stars were shining, and he stood in prayer and contemplation. He saw the head of a human figure with a terrifying face full of wrath and threats." Unquote. The interpretation agrees perfectly with the modern amplification furnished by Revelation 1:13. Nor should we forget Brother Klaus's other visions, for instance, the Christ in the bearskin of God of God the Father and God the Mother, and of himself as the Son. They exhibit features which are very undogmatic indeed. Now, I just mentioned that finally Brother Klaus could not actually put the image that he saw in the stained glass window at Saxon. So he actually covered it over with an image of the Trinity, which is what he could cope with. Going on, paragraph 16. Traditionally, this great vision was brought into connection with the Trinity picture in the church at Saxon, and so, likewise, was the wheel symbolism in the so-called Pilgrim's Tract. Brother Klaus, we are told, showed the picture of the wheel to a visiting pilgrim. Evidently, this picture had preoccupied him for some time. Blank is of the opinion that, contrary to tradition, there is no connection between the vision and the Trinity picture. This skepticism seems to me to go too far. There must have been some reason for Brother Klaus's interest in the wheel. Visions like the one he had often caused mental confusion and disintegration. Witness the heart bursting into little pieces. We know from experience that the protective circle, the mandala, is the traditional antidote for chaotic states of mind. It is therefore only too clear why Brother Klaus was fascinated by the symbol of the wheel. The interpretation of the terrifying vision as an experience of God need not be so wide of the mark either. The connection between the great vision and the Trinity picture, and of both with the wheel symbol, therefore seems to me very probable on a psychological ground. This vision undoubtedly fearful and highly perturbing, which burst like a volcano upon his religious view of the world, without any dogmatic prelude and without exegetical commentary, naturally needed a long labor of assimilation in order to fit it into the total structure of the psyche and thus restore the disturbed psychic balance. Brother Klaus came to terms with his experience on the basis of dogma, then firm as a rock, and the dogma proved its powers of assimilation by turning something horrifyingly alive into the beautiful abstraction of the Trinity idea. But the reconciliation might have taken place on a quite different basis provided by the vision itself and its unearthly actuality. Much of the disadvantage of the Christian conception of God, and no doubt to the still greater disadvantage of Brother Klaus himself, who would then have become not a saint, but a heretic, if not a lunatic, and would probably have ended his life at the stake. Okay, so I'm going to read that last very long sentence again because I got lost in it myself, so it's probably hard for you to follow it. So he's talking about Brother Klaus having had a vision, and many of you are aware that I've had a few visions, but one of them was a vision of Mephistopheles sitting down in the car next to me, which was definitely a vision that needed assimilation. And so once you have such a vision, which is a psychogenic event, then you have to be able to assimilate that. I have assimilated it by my study of Jungian psychology, but here he's talking about how Brother Klaus reconciled it. So let me read from the beginning of his reconciliation. So, Brother Klaus came to terms with his experience on the basis of dogma, then firm as a rock, and the dogma proved its powers of assimilation by turning something horribly alive into the beautiful abstraction of the Trinity idea. But the reconciliation might have taken place on a quite different basis, provided by the vision itself and its unearthly actuality. Much of the disadvantage of the Christian conception of God, and no doubt to the still greater disadvantage of Brother Klaus himself, would then have become who would then have become not a saint, but a heretic, if not a lunatic, and would probably have ended his life at the stake. Okay, so in other words, if Brother Klaus hadn't gotten his vision into the dogma in some way by assimilation, he probably would have been seen as a lunatic and maybe burned at the stake. That's Jung's point. Okay. Sean says, if we can't control the archetypes inside of us, I do think we can control the circumstances or landscapes they occur in on a positive note. What do you think about the analogy of gardening to thinking, keeping oneself healthy, but it takes a bit of work? Well, yes, to a degree, I agree with that. And that's what the dogma has done. I mean, it gave people a handle of going to church, or in the East, people would draw mandalas. I know I've always liked to look at kaleidoscopes. I used to have a really nice one until it fell apart from use. But if you look at a kaleidoscope, they're all mandalas, and they're mandalas which change, but they are contained within a circle. And so in that way, they can be very soothing. And so you can soothe yourself by dogma or by many other means. I have always turned to Dr. Jung for my soothing, or most of the time. Sometimes I've gone to the chapel at the Naval Academy. But gardening can be a solution too. And Truth says, hello all. Hey, Truth. Truth says, may I use your music during my tarot live stream as ambient? Sean says, yes, go ahead, man. Okay, enjoy your tarot. Mandala drawing is a very soothing activity. Okay, then he corrects it to mandala drawing. You said Mandalay drawing, and I'm thinking, Mandalay Hotel in Las Vegas, Mandalay in China. What are we talking about here? But thank you for correcting that, Spellbot. Okay, here we go. Okay, so we've saved Brother Klaus from the stake, and now he's a saint. But he did have this vision which caused his face to change into something like that, and therefore people couldn't look at him for a while anyway. Paragraph 18. This example demonstrates the use of the dogmatic symbol. It formulates a tremendous and dangerously decisive psychic experience, fittingly called an experience of the divine, in a way that is tolerable to our human understanding, without either limiting the scope of the experience or doing damage to its overwhelming significance. The vision of divine wrath, which we also meet in Jacob Boehme, ill accords with the God of the New Testament, the loving Father in heaven, and for this reason it might easily have become the source of an inner conflict. That would have been quite in keeping with the spirit of the age, the end of the 15th century, the time of Nicholas Cusanus, whose formula of the Complexio Oppositorum actually anticipated the schism that was imminent. Not long afterward, the Yahwistic conception of God went through a series of rebirths in Protestantism. Yahweh is a God concept that contains the opposites in a still undivided state. And we know this from Answer to Job and the book of Job, because Job decided he was going to take his case to the good side of God, not the bad side of God, and that got him through. And by the way, that's probably the right answer, because as you remember in 1 John 4:1, Jesus says, remember to test the spirits. And so you have a good side and a bad side coming up from your psyche, from your unconscious, from your psyche. And it's your strong ego, which you've developed over your lifetime, which is what gives you the ability to decide for the good as opposed to the bad. That's what lets you go to the grocery store, because notwithstanding the thou shalt not kill, you still have to eat. And as the Buddhists say, all life lives on other life. And so you're able to use your ego to decide, yep, I'm going to eat tonight. I'm going to go to the grocery store. All right, so Yahweh is a God concept that contains the opposites in a still undivided state. Paragraph 19. Brother Klaus put himself outside the beaten track of convention and habit by leaving his home and family, living alone for years, and gazing deep into the dark mirror, so that the wondrous and terrible boon of original experience befell him. In this situation, the dogmatic image of divinity that had been developed over the centuries worked like a healing draught. It helped him to assimilate the fatal incursion of an archetypal image and so escape being torn asunder. Angelus Silesius was not so fortunate. The inner conflict tore him to pieces, because in his day, the stability of the church that dogma guarantees was already shattered. And, I would say that when I had my vision of Mephistopheles, it dropped me into a dualistic hell for quite some time, perhaps a decade. It took a lot of reading before I got out of that. Let's see. Truth Convoy says sainthood is risky stuff. Absolutely. We know of a lot of saints that ended up burned at the stake. Okay, so paragraph 20. Jacob Boehme, too, knew a god of the wrath fire, a real deus absconditus. He was able to bridge the profound and agonizing contradiction on the one hand by means of the Christian formula of Father and Son, and embody it speculatively in his view of the world, which, though Gnostic, was in all essential points Christian. Otherwise, he would have become a dualist. On the other hand, it was undoubtedly alchemy, long brewing the union of opposites in secret, that came to his aid. Nevertheless, the opposition has left obvious traces in the mandala appended to his XL questions concerning the soul, showing the nature of the divinity. The mandala is divided into a dark half and a light half, and the semicircles that are drawn round them, instead of joining up to form a ring, are turned back to back. And I've actually seen that mandala, but I don't have a copy of it here. Paragraph 21. Dogma takes the place of the collective unconscious by formulating its contents on a grand scale. The Catholic way of life is completely unaware of the psychological problems in this sense. Almost the entire life of the collective unconscious has been channeled into the dogmatic archetypal ideas and flows along a well-controlled stream in the symbolism of creed and ritual. It manifests itself in the inwardness of the Catholic psyche. The collective unconscious, as we understand it today, was never a matter of psychology, for before the Christian Church existed, there were the antique mysteries, and these reach back into the gray mist of Neolithic prehistory. Mankind has never lacked powerful images to lend magical aid against all the uncanny things that live in the depths of the psyche. Always the figures of the unconscious were expressed in protecting and healing images, and in this way were expelled from the psyche into cosmic space. The iconoclasm of the Reformation, however, quite literally made a breach in the protective wall of sacred images, and since then, one image after another has crumbled away. They became dubious, for they conflicted with awakening reason. Besides, people had long since forgotten what they meant, or had they really forgotten? Could it be that men had never really known what they meant, and that only in recent times did it occur to the Protestant part of mankind that actually we haven't the remotest conception of what is meant by the virgin birth, the divinity of Christ, and the complexities of the Trinity? Okay, yeah, we don't have any idea what those mean. That's a fact. But actually, this is an earlier book of Dr. Jung's. It was written in 1934, so it was 20 years later that he wrote Answer to Job, in which he simply said that all religious ideas are ideas of the psyche, not ideas of the physical world. And of course, we still have many Christian Bible thumpers who are trying to tell you that everything in the Bible is true in the physical world, and that's not right at all. But everything in the Bible is true only in the psyche. But that's also true of the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, and all other religious texts. So I'll just read this. I'll just read this again so that you're clear. The iconoclasm of the Reformation, however, quite literally made a breach in the protective wall of sacred images, and since then, one image after another has crumbled away. They became dubious, for they conflicted with awakening reason. Besides, people had long since forgotten what they meant, or had they really forgotten? Could it be that men had never really known what they meant, and that only in recent times did it occur to the Protestant part of mankind that actually we haven't the remotest conception of what is meant by the virgin birth, the divinity of Christ, and the complexities of the Trinity? It almost seems as if these images had just lived, and as if their living existence had simply been accepted without question and without reflection, much as everyone decorates Christmas trees or hides Easter eggs without ever knowing what these customs mean. I think later in his writing he did come to better understanding of what they meant and explained it better. And so if you haven't read Answer to Job, I urge you to do that. Or if you want to hear me read it to you, you can find my complete reading of Answer to Job on the YouTube channel. Sean says, sunlight, the luminous center of ideals, is the mixture of archetypes, right? And Truth Convoy says, layers of truth, teaching of the soul. The archetype of Jesus is the embodiment of the Logos in form. Well, that can be your explanation, but if you look at volume 9.2, which is Ion, you'll find that Dr. Jung calls the archetype of Jesus as a symbol of the self. And I don't think the self isn't only the embodiment of the Logos. The self is the embodiment of the Complexio Oppositorum, which is everything, both Logos and Eros. Martin says, Jesus is the king archetype. He has all, and the magician, king, warrior, magician, lover. Again, I refer you to Ion, chapter 5. And so Martin says, Jesus, Truth says, verbal equals left brain, Christ archetype united that side with the right side visual. Yeah, okay. Fair enough. Thomas Dennis says, Jung is apt in his condemnation here, paragraph 22, hiding Easter eggs and decoration of Christmas. I see. Jung is apt. In other words, Thomas means correct. And, I don't know that Dr. Jung was condemning it in any sort of personal nature. I mean, I don't think we know whether he went along with the traditions of Christmas tree and Easter egg in his family life. He may well have. So I don't think it was condemnation so much as he knew basically what they meant, and they were pagan symbols. and so he was, he just went along with the family, so he wasn't condemning it so much as just observing that we don't really get it, what we're doing. Okay, now where was I? All right. The fact is that archetypal images are so packed with meaning in themselves that people never think of asking what they really do mean. That the gods die from time to time is due to man's sudden discovery that they do not mean anything, that they are made by human hands, useless idols of wood and stone. In reality, however, he has merely discovered that up till then he has never thought about this image at all, and when he starts thinking about them, he does so with the help of what he calls reason, which in point of fact is nothing more than the sum total of all his prejudices and myopic views. Now, that's a pretty pregnant sentence for anybody that loves Jordan Peterson and the 12 Rules of Life. So I will read it again for you, because this is about the logos. And when he starts thinking about them, he does so with the help of what he calls reason, which in point of fact is nothing more than the sum total of all his prejudices and myopic views. Take that, Jordan. Let's see. So I think I've clarified your point, Truth Convoy. Thomas says, the fact is that archetypal images are so packed with meaning in themselves that people never think what they really do mean. Yes, that's what, as you correctly say in this paragraph, is what he says. Right and left side is not exactly true. It's been proven we use all parts, yes. In 24, there's his talking of Protestantism dissolving into dozens and dozens of denominations, which seems true, yes. And Truth Convoy says, Jordan Peterson has unnerving tremor in his voice, too much anxiety for me. I hope I don't have too much tremor in my voice, because I had the back of my throat removed 20 years ago, and so I get phlegm coming up from my innards, and that causes me to have a bit of a gravelly voice. Okay, so we talked about rationalism being the sum total of his prejudices and myopic views. Paragraph 23, the history of Protestantism has been one of chronic iconoclasm. Right. As those of us who have lived in Rochester, New York, know, because Palmyra is nearby, where Joseph Smith, I believe, wrote the Book of Mormon, which is a novel by Joseph Smith, which the Mormons now follow. And so anyway, the history of Protestantism has been one of chronic iconoclasm. One wall after another fell. One wall after another fell, and the work of destruction was not too difficult once the authority of the church had been shattered. We all know how in large things as in small, in general as well as in particular, piece after piece collapsed, and how the alarming poverty of symbols that is now the condition of our life came about. With that, the power of the church was vanished too, a fortress robbed of its bastions and casements, a house whose walls have been plucked away, exposed to all the winds of the world and to all dangers. Right, and keeping in mind here that one of Dr. Jung's key points is that we think in images. This is why he's emphasizing this issue of images for anyone who's new to this. We tend to think in images or series of images as a process, and therefore, if our images fall apart, we've got a problem. Paragraph 24, although this is, properly speaking, a lamentable collapse that offends our sense of history, the disintegration of Protestantism into nearly 400 denominations is yet a sure sign that the restlessness continues. The Protestant is cast out into a state of defenselessness that might well make the natural man shudder. His enlightened consciousness, of course, refuses to take cognizance of this fact and is quietly looking elsewhere for what has been lost in Europe. We seek the effect of images, the thought forms that satisfy, the restlessness of the heart and mind, and we find the treasures of the East. And so Sean says, reductionism is very important, but it should be kept as a lens to see the world and not as divine truth. I think we all have to find our own divine truth in our own God image. I think that's quite right, Sean. And Truth Convoy says, no, you seem comfortable. Yes, I love your reading voice. Oh, okay, good. So reading on. Another 2 pages. Paragraph 25. There is no objection to this in and for itself. Nobody forced the Romans to import Asiatic cults in bulk. If Christianity had really been, as so often described, alien to the Germanic tribes, they could easily have rejected it when the prestige of the Roman legions began to wane. But Christianity had come to stay because it fits in with the existing archetypal pattern. In the course of the centuries, however, it turned into something its founder might well have wondered at had he lived to see it. Why then would the West not assimilate Eastern forms? The Romans too went to Eleusis, Samothrace, and Egypt in order to get themselves initiated. In Egypt, there even seems to have been a regular tourist trade in this commodity, and certainly I see that abroad, even in Annapolis today, because all you have to do is go to your local gym and go to a yoga class where the yoga teachers are pretty much teaching yoga, which comes from India, and I would call it Hinduism light, and people accept it. Paragraph 26, and Thomas Shirley has something to say about that. Okay, chapter 26. The gods of Greece and Rome perished from the same disease as did our Christian symbols. People discovered then, as today, that they had no thoughts whatever on the subject. On the other hand, the gods of the strangers still had unexhausted mana. Their names were weird and incomprehensible, and their deeds portentously dark, something altogether different from the hackneyed chronique scandaleuse of Olympus. At least one couldn't understand the Asiatic symbols, and for this reason they were not banal like the conventional gods. The fact that people accepted the new as unthinkingly as they had rejected the old did not become a problem at that time. Okay, so what he's saying is that we want something mysterious, I think, and if you know that all the Greek gods are not gods, but ideas or archetypes, then you're not going to worship them. But if you get presented with something mysterious, then you're going to look into it. And so we have this everywhere today where people are becoming Buddhist. And if you just look behind me, my wife is a lay Buddhist teacher, one of the leading ones in the Washington, D.C. area, and she's been to a 3-year retreat, which is basically the equivalent of divinity school for a Buddhist, except she's not ordained. And so you can see that these things are I'm right in the middle of them, but you know, I go to a Buddhist meditation class every Monday. I mainly do that to have a quiet time of contemplation so that I can hear my psyche talk. I can hear myself if I turn off the radio and go to the meditation class, but the mystery of Buddhism is no longer there for me, I would say. And so, paragraph 27. Is it becoming a problem today? Shall we be able to put on, like a new suit of clothes, ready-made symbols grown on foreign soil, saturated with foreign blood, spoken in a foreign tongue, nourished by a foreign culture, interwoven with foreign history, and so resemble a beggar who wraps himself in kingly raiment, a king who disguises himself as a beggar? No doubt this is possible. Or is there something in ourselves that commands us to go in for no mummeries, but perhaps even to sew our garment ourselves? And this would comport with Jungian analyst Thomas More, who wrote a book called A Religion of Your Own, and it's a very good book. I urge you to read it. Paragraph 28. I am convinced that the growing impoverishment of symbols has a meaning. It is a development that has an inner consistency. Everything that we have not thought about and that has therefore been deprived of a meaningful connection with our developing consciousness has got lost. If we now try to cover our nakedness with the gorgeous trappings of the East, as the Theosophists do, we would be playing our own history false. A man does not sink down to beggary only to pose afterward as the Indian potentate. It seems to me that it would be far better stoutly to avow our spiritual poverty, our symbollessness, instead of feigning a legacy of which we are not the legitimate heirs at all. We are surely the rightful heirs of Christian symbolism, but somehow we have squandered this heritage. We have let the house of our fathers built fall into decay, and now we try to break into Oriental palaces that our fathers never knew. Anyone who has lost the historical symbols and cannot be satisfied with substitutes is certainly in a very difficult position today. Before him there yawns the void, and he turns away from it in horror. What is worse, the vacuum gets filled with absurd political and social ideas, which one and all are distinguished by their spiritual bleakness. But if we cannot get along with these pedantic dogmatisms, he sees himself forced to be serious for once with his alleged trust in God, though it usually turns out that his fear of things going wrong, if he did so, is even more persuasive. This fear is far from unjustified, for where God is closest, the danger seems greatest. It is dangerous to avow spiritual poverty, for the poor man has desires, and whoever has desires calls down some fatality on himself. A Swiss proverb puts it drastically, quote, behind every rich man stands a devil. Behind every poor man, two. Okay, I'll read that once more. Behind every rich man stands a devil. Behind every poor man, two. Okay, so I'm going to discontinue that reading for today. I've cut this essay into 4 parts, and I'll read the next 3 parts in the next couple of days, and then I'm planning to do a special video on Beto O'Rourke as manifesting the Savior archetype. I'll do that over the weekend, and please do not shout at me about your political views, because I don't make these things up, and it doesn't matter whether you're for or against him. What I'm observing is only a phenomenon which is occurring, emerging out of the collective unconscious, and so I don't care if you agree with me actually, but I'm talking about a psychological phenomenon, a phenomenon where we're all in this collective, and we all seem more or less the same if we're Americans or Europeans, etc. And then suddenly someone gets thrust into the limelight. So in the case of the two that I've highlighted so far, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Beto O'Rourke, they both have been selected somehow. Nobody selected them per se, but somehow the collective has selected them, whether they love or hate them. And so they're now being thrust into the forefront for the 2020 election. And so in the case of Alexandria, she had more visitors than anybody else at the South by Southwest Conference, even though there were presidential candidates there. She got the most visitors in her speech. And she has recently had a cover on Time magazine. And this morning I learned that Beto O'Rourke has now had a cover on Time magazine. And last weekend we learned that he had raised $6.1 million in the first 24 hours of his campaign, which is more than anybody else has raised. So those facts that we can't deny, that are undeniable, those are symptoms of this being pushed up out of the collective unconscious, both by those in favor of and by those against. So I'll go over to your questions, and then I'll terminate for today, and then I'll go on with this reading with paragraph 29 for the next reading. So let's see. Sean says, wait a minute here. Sean says, reductionism is very important, but it should be kept as a lens to see the world, not as divine truth. I agree with that. Truth Combat says, you seem comfortable, and Sean says, yes, I love your reading voice. I think he's referring to I hope that's me. And Sean says, the adjustment of pictures, images takes a sort of power energy. The synthesis doesn't seem like I'm very conscious of when it happens to myself. Yeah, I mean, you have to see what resonates with you. I mean, there used to be a catalog of Jungian stuff called the Sounds True catalog. It's now online. It doesn't come in paper anymore. And so what Jung has said, and what all the writers since him have said, resonates with people, and so it sounds true. The same would be true with images that move you, and it can be very surprising what images move you, as I've talked about my experience with Pollock. I mean, I'm a thinking, perceiving guy, so I don't tend to get very emotional. And, although I like art, and I like paintings, and I like to visit museums, I'm not like some people will go to an art museum and they'll just be in tears, but that really never happened to me until this one occasion that you all know of, where I looked up at this drip painting by Jackson Pollock that had no image in it whatsoever, and I just burst into sobbing, and I couldn't stop for 10 minutes. And, it took me 20 years to work it out. I'm not going to retell that story now, but you can find it on the site. Just put in Jackson Pollock painting on the search, and you'll be able to find it in my YouTube channel. And so you just never know what's going to hit you, is my point. Sean says, worship brought to mind process addiction. Yeah, I think that's kind of what ritual is. It's a kind of process addiction. It's a protection of you from the unconscious. It's protecting you from the unconscious. And so if you're a believing Christian, an actual believing Christian, you just don't accept other images, and that does protect you from the unconscious. It also protects you from having perhaps a full life, though, because you don't know yourself then. And at least, that's my opinion. And if you want to be whole, you have to examine what's behind it. And that's where Answer to Job comes in. And Sean says, my brain is very jumpy. Thanks for the reading. Massamea says, I'm new here, new in live chat and in Carl Jung too. Well, I would say to you that there are playlists called JRG 1, 2, and 3. That stands for Jung Reading Group, Year 1, Year 2, Year 3. We're in Year 3 right now. But especially if you go back to JRG 1 and start at the beginning, you can have the logical process as I've presented it. But honestly, there's no good place to start with Jungian psychology. So you might as well just be here and catch on to it as we go along. That's the way it works. And we're all learning. Okay, Sean says, no worries, I'm learning too, and I'm learning too. And I'm not stating any dicta that apply to you. Okay, I'm not a mental health professional, and it's up to you to decide if these things apply to you or not. And Massamea says, new to the English language too. That makes it very difficult, but Jung's work is in many languages, so you might want to get it in your native language. And if you have disturbing dreams, then you should be writing them down, it seems to me, and trying to understand what your psyche is telling you by those dreams, because your dreams are your psyche telling you, giving you a message that it thinks you need to know. And if they're disturbing, that means yourself, your deep unconscious, thinks you should be doing something different from what you're doing, I think. I haven't had a true nightmare in years and years. Sean agrees with my opinion on wholeness. That's great. Info Overdose says, hello. Masmea says, I'm Muslim, but I dream a lot of dreams about churches. Okay, Masmea, I would say to you that you will find a lot of things which on this YouTube channel that are sympathetic with Muslims. Islam is one of the Abrahamic religions, as you know, but maybe our Christian and Jewish followers might not know, or our Buddhist or Hindu followers might not know. And so there are a lot of things that do apply to you. And what I would do is go to, I did translate some of these videos into Arabic to make it easier for my Muslim listeners. And so there is closed captioning in Arabic on several of the videos, especially the ones that apply to Edward Edinger. And so 2 of those are called Edward Edinger Portable Analytic Hour. It's actually ended up being about an hour and 15 minutes, so it's in 2 videos. But if you go to those videos, and there's a couple of others in that playlist, and go down, put your cursor over the bottom of the YouTube, and you'll see the CC for closed captioning. Put your cursor there, you'll see a little gear. Hit the gear, and you'll see a selection for language. And if you click that, you'll see you can select Arabic. And then you can have closed captioning on those videos in Arabic. And I think you might find that very helpful to you. And especially because you're having disturbing dreams, that Edward Edinger Portable Analytic Hour is good for all of us, because it's something that we can all go back and refer to and understand what the issues are. But as I say, I'm not a mental health professional, so this is just what I, based on my experience, I would recommend that. And Info Overdose says, how do you analyze dreams? You have to understand symbols, and by that I don't mean go out and buy a symbol book, because those are worthless, honestly. And maybe they'd be helpful if you're an actual Jungian analyst, but for us, we have to understand, what is this picture, this story, saying to us personally. So when our psyche is presenting us with an image or a story in a dream, it's coming from our unconscious. Okay, it's not coming from somebody else's unconscious. And so therefore those images are in you. And so you need to ask yourself what those images and what that story means to you. And I'll just very quickly give you an example of how that worked for me. A couple of years back, in the first year of this reading group, you'll find some videos where I was about to have my knee replaced, and it was quite upsetting, of course, to know that you have to go under major surgery and have part of your body removed and replaced. And so we read a book of symbols about all the meanings of the word knee. And I had a dream. It was quite a vivid dream. And the dream was, I was in a dark parking lot. There was a white limousine there with its back doors open. And my local reading group was all getting into this limousine, this white limousine, but I hadn't got in it yet. And one of them says, "Where's Albert?" Like as if Albert was one of the people that we were looking to have to get into the limousine. And I look across the dark parking lot, and there's a Nazi truck and Nazis loading Albert into the back of the truck. And he's screaming at me to help him. And so afterward, I sort of have to chuckle about it now, because afterward I realized that Albert in that dream was actually my knee, and that the Nazis in that dream were the surgeons who were about to remove Albert, and I couldn't help him. And so, and so we still have a joke in the local group about how's Albert, and so you're never going to find that in a symbols book or any book. You're never going to have anything like that mentioned in a dream book about a knee. And so you just have to work with yourself. You have to do the inner work and say, okay, my psyche is trying to tell me these are images that are within me, and it's trying to tell me something. And you have to try to understand what that means. And, I often give the example of the police car vision that I often have. And it's a waking vision that I have, and it comes up when certain things are happening in the environment that warn me, but at a subconscious level. So it's like a predator instinct. And so it's my psyche saying this kind of predator is there. And not that I think police officers are predators, but I'm talking about primal psyche talking to me. Okay, so my primal psyche takes a police car and says, this is a predator. And so whenever I have that vision, I know that within a minute or two, I'm going to see police activity. It always happens. And so I have no need for a radar detector because my own psyche is faster than a radar detector, and it tells me what to do. I hope that's helpful. Info overdose. So, Sophia Sonnen says, which of Jung's works am I reading from? I'm reading from The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious by C.G. Jung. It's volume 9, small I, of the collected works of C.G. Jung. Sophia says she's studied all of the works more than once. And what is the question about a white bear? I don't understand that question. Masmea says, thank you so much. Another question, please. What about repetitive dreams or dreams in old era? Thank you again, sir. Well, repetitive dreams are your unconscious trying to get through to you. Wake up there, conscious mind. I'm trying to tell you something. Wake up. That's the way I take it. So when you have a repetitive dream, I urge you to try to understand it, but from your own experience, not from anybody else's dream book. And dreams in the old era, that's fine, because those dreams probably come from imagery that you have in your personal life. One way or another, you studied history, or something that those images exist, that you've experienced them personally, usually, and so it's your unconscious, your psyche in dreams is selecting from images which are in your psyche to try to convey a message to you. Think of it as charades. Okay, it's something like that. Your unconscious can't speak to you in Arabic or English. It developed to communicate with you in images, and it developed that way long before human beings existed. I mean, obviously there were tigers in the primeval woods, for example, and so an early great ape would have been warned by its unconscious about the tiger by having an image of a tiger coming into its mind. And so that's the way the unconscious warns you or tells you something. And that existed long before human beings came along. So its only language that it has available for its use is imagery, and it has to use the imagery that's in your unconscious. And so the fact that it's old era imagery, that's doesn't mean anything special to me. I mean, what does it mean to you? We've all seen a lot of movies, and so you can see almost anything from prehistoric times to thousands of years in the future, based on imagery that you might have seen in movies. And so it's just your unconscious selecting from those images to try to pass a fundamental message to you. That's what it is. And the fact that it is old era just means that it's an image that you have in your psyche. Sophia says, I'm very interested in Gnosticism and the myth of Sophia. Well, Gnosticism is very important, and especially since Jung's time, they've found some new Gnostic texts which are useful. Dr. Jung, in his early days, before the so-called Jung Codex was found, didn't have much to work with on Gnosticism, but the most significant thing about Gnosticism is the direct experience with God. And whereas Christianity and other religions, they have priests or ministers or what have you, mullahs, who interpose themselves between you and God. Maybe not in Islam, because I think in Islam you're supposed to have a direct experience of God. But certainly in Judaism and Christianity, our rabbis or our priests put themselves in between us and God. And okay, that protects us from our unconscious, but it also cuts us off from having a direct religious experience. And if you have a direct religious experience, then you don't need them. Okay, then you don't need a creed anymore, because you no longer have to believe. I mean, it's like Brother Klaus in the 15th century. He had a direct religious experience, and, it shook him, and he had to assimilate it, which he did, and therefore became a saint. But after that, he didn't have much need for the church. And so this is the significance of what you can find on this YouTube, where you put in Jung and I have no need to believe I know as a quote, and you'll get a video where he is asked whether he believes in God, and he says, I have no need to believe I know. And that, when I saw that was an epiphany for me, because I said to myself, oh my God, I know. And so then I had to stop and say, okay, what do I know? And what I now know, after many years of reflection on this, is that religious experiences are real. They're unique to each individual. And if you have such an experience, then you have no need to believe you know. And then you can go to church and respect it for what it is, which is a marvelous set of images that bring you through various aspects of your psychic life and protect you. Actually, they do. But you don't have to believe in them in a physical way. They're metaphysical, and so they're everything that happens in a church or a temple or what have you is a process of the psyche. They're bringing you through a process in the psyche which may be unconscious to you. And so I used to be mystified when I was 30, because I would go to church, and after I came out of church, I would say to myself, wow, I feel better, but I didn't know why I felt better. And, you know, with 2020 hindsight now, I can say, well, I must have felt better because the church took me through some psychological process that helped me with my mental development or my mental state at the time, and they still can do that, and so therefore they work in that way. But it's not only Christianity and Protestantism or Catholicism that does it. It's all religions do that. That's what they do. And so anyway, and also the myth of Sophia. You can find Sophia in Proverbs, where Sophia is described very thoroughly. I'm not sure I can put my finger on it right quickly here, and I need to wrap this up. But if you look in Proverbs or look up Sophia in the Bible, or one way to do it would be to Google Sophia in the Bible, and that'll give you some of the verses in the Old Testament about Sophia, who is wisdom, okay, and philosophy means love of Sophia, and so that's so the myth of Sophia is very valuable. She is she's the playmate of Yahweh. She's the other Yahweh's other half, and she's wisdom. So I urge you to take a look at that. Info Overdose says, what makes archetype an archetype? Repetition, I think, is the answer. But I mean, these things go back to the invention of sex by single cell organisms, right? Once sex was invented, then there were male and female creatures, even if they had only one cell, and one of those cells was a mother, and one of those cells was a father, and so the mother archetype developed from then, and they've been developing for presumably 3.5 billion years, and so you can think of them as like the Grand Canyon. They've grown their courses through evolution in all species, and you know, it's just fascinating to watch other creatures. Do I have a picture here? I might have. It's fascinating to watch other creatures and see the these archetypes operating in them. Here's my favorite one. Okay, this is the so-called Decora eagle, and she is, this picture we did a screen capture about 2 or 3 years ago in February, and she had 4 eggs under her at that point in time, and she was not going to move. Okay, she absolutely wouldn't have moved for anything, and so the snowstorm came in on her, and she refused to move, and she raised several chicks after that, thanks to her commitment as a mother. And so that's a perfect example of the mother archetype in operation. Tor says, you analyze dreams by seeing how they relate to your life. What dreams means very much on the internet, but can give you an idea, and have sometimes worked in very dusty places. And after I have a repeating dream about spiders, often large ones, dream books make very different interpretations of spiders. Yes, I agree with that. And Sophia says she has no idea why she dreamed of a white bear. And so as I was describing Albert, the white bear might not be a white bear, and so you have to think of it in the context either of that dream or that series of dreams, and then you might get an insight into what it means. But, you know, we've all seen a white bear in pictures, I think. And Jonathan says, why do I say Yahweh? I don't know, that's the way I say it. I think Orthodox Jews say Yahweh or something like that with no vowels. I wasn't raised Jewish, so I haven't learned Hebrew in that way. Yeah, Masmaya says polar bear could mean loneliness, the wise loneliness, yes. Has to leave, peace. Thanks everybody's here. I'll be loyal to your channel. Sophia says, I've seen the video where Jung says, I know about God. Right. Once you see it, it's a very moving thing for anybody that, you know, has been following a religion all their lives. I think it's very moving, but unfortunately, I'm so far out on the intuitive scale that I just don't know what others get. I mean, I was very moved by that particular video as a 99th percentile intuitive, but if you're a 99th percentile sensing person, I don't know, I'm totally blind to what you might have gotten out of that. Jonathan says, just wondering about the Yahweh question. Info overdose. Jung said in the BBC broadcast there are peculiar faculties of the psychic that are not completely confined to space and time alone. What did he mean? I thought it was awesome. I think he was referring to synchronicity, and synchronicity does not rely on time and space. And, you know, physics doesn't know everything. But, you know, the point is that Western society has been built up on logos, which assumes cause and effect. And what Jung pointed out was that synchronous things occur. That is, there's no apparent cause, but something happens. And so that's how religious experiences often occur, that you have a readiness in your psyche that you're not aware of, you're unconscious of it, but all of a sudden you see something or something occurs and you say, aha, that's what that means. And so it can be something like love at first sight. That would be a good example where, you know, that's sort of a bread and butter example because it happens to most people when they're in their teens. They see someone and they say, oh, that's the one for me, whether it's a boy or a girl. And so that would be a synchronicity, which is you're ready to find a mate, and suddenly your unconscious sees a person that meets your unconscious idea of what the perfect mate would be, and then boom, you're off to the races. And so, I mean, that still is happening to me, except now I know that it's my unconscious working on me. So just looking for another image here. I know it's my unconscious communicating with me, so I say, whoa there, buddy, just wait a minute. I can't find the picture I wanted. Okay, so going on. So I hope that answers your question about space and time, because synchronicity does not require space and time, and you can also, you could think about it a little bit in terms of how you view light. You either view light as a particle or a wave, but you can't look at it both ways. And so science has proven that light comes through in both ways, both a particle and a wave. But depending on how you look at it is what you see. I mean, you either see a wave or a particle, but you don't see both. And so it's something like that. I mean, both are happening at the same time, but it's not dependent on time and space per se. And Info Overdoses, did you watch Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris debate religion? I have looked at it long ago, and so I can't say as I am very conscious of it at this moment. Is there a specific question that you had in connection with that? For me, Jordan Peterson has done a wonderful job of explaining the Bible in psychological terms, in terms of the logos. And so, but even though he refers to Jung, sometimes I wonder if he really fully grokked Jung, because, I never heard him actually say, and it isn't that he didn't, he's making more videos than I am, so I can't keep up, but I haven't heard him say that every religious statement of whatever kind is a statement of the psyche. It's not a statement of the physis, the physical world. And that is the fundamental quote from Jung about this point, which appears in paragraph 752 of Answer to Job. And so I've never heard him quite pull that together. And that's another epiphany for me, because I said, of course, it's not about whether the Bible is absolutely true in the physical world, because it's not true in the physical world. It's only true in the world of the psyche. I mean, it might be true in the physical world in the sense of some historical facts, more or less accurately described, but in terms of virgin birth, well, there was in the physical world there was a miracle, and the miracle was that Mary wasn't stoned to death, and so the miracle was she had a dream about the Annunciation, and her betrothed at the time, Joseph, also had that dream, and so he didn't have her stoned. But in that part of the world, a woman that is an unwed mother could easily be stoned today. And so the miracle was that she wasn't stoned to death. and so that's in the physical world. But in the psychic world, there had been virgin birth for 1,000 years before Mary. That's what Isis and Horus are about, I think. among other things. And I'm not talking about the current militant group that calls itself ISIS. I'm talking about the Egyptian pharaonic woman who was the mother of Horus and his brothers, or whatever. I don't know that myth very well, but her birth of Horus was supposedly virgin. So I believe. So the idea of virgin birth was in the psyche 1,000 years before Mary and Jesus came along. That's the point. And so it is true, it's real, and it has been real for the 2,000 years since then. And so it's true as a psychic fact. Let's see. And Tor says that in the debate between Jordan and Peterson and Sam Harris, they didn't get anywhere because they said that would be the opposite of saying of Jung saying he knows God. And I'm willing to work with people on understanding what Jung's point is, because I think it makes us better human beings to understand his point. Because once you've had a true religious experience, and there's a book by William James called The Varieties of Religious Experience, it has an audible version. I'm just putting it on the chat here. And so I'm currently reading it myself, but it's an excellent book, and I would urge you to take a listen to that. And Info Overdose said, what did Jung think about death and life after death? Well, he said a lot of things. There's an entire essay about it. I think it's even in this volume, and which I am going to read at some point. Let me just see. Okay, yes. In starting on page 113 of this volume, The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, there's an essay called About Rebirth, I think. And, fundamentally, Dr. Jung said that when people get older, they don't believe in death. And I think that he felt that, the spirit goes on. Okay, this body of ours is sort of a defective machine that ultimately is going to break down like all other machines. But the spirit goes on, and obviously the spirit of Jesus Christ, the spirit of Gautama Buddha, the spirit of Confucius, and many others, the spirit of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, or Ludwig von Beethoven, or Mozart, or so many others, their spirit lives on. And there's no question that Jung's spirit lives on, because it's right here between you and me today, right this minute. And it is there because he knew that what he had done was going to live after his death. And, at one point, years and years ago, I was saying, well, geez, I've moved so much, where would I be buried so that there'd be a monument? And my wife rightfully said, you're making your own monument all the time, because I was painting or I was writing or making these videos. And part of what I'm doing is making these videos so that my grandchildren will know something about what Granddad thought. I think of my own grandparents, and I have almost nothing from my own grandparents, and I really don't have any idea what they thought about life. I have memories of them, and so their spirits live on in me through those memories, but almost nothing else. And so one of my motivations for creating this YouTube channel has always been to leave a sense of my personal spirit for my grandchildren to interact with when they're old enough. And mind you, it's not easy, although I do think that young people are more precocious now than they were at the time Jung lived. Jung wasn't very interested in people until they were 35 or 40, because his point was that until you reach that age, you're just doing research. You're learning how to live life as a human being, and it's only after that time, and probably after you've raised your own children, then is when you've reached full maturity, and then the meaning of your life will unfold in front of you. And I think that there's there are plenty of examples now that I've run into, including present people on this stream right this minute, who are younger than 35 or 40, but they're starting to get it much earlier that these things are important. And that's a function of our age, the function of the fact that we all carry cell phones around and can learn at our own speed, rather than having to wait for the grades of high school and college or whatever they are to teach us things. So I think that's what Jung meant in terms of an ongoing life, that there is no such thing as death, and I think the Buddhists would say something similar, basically, and so is this consciousness that you're sitting in right now watching this video going to be reborn into another body in the future? I'm doubtful. But here's the consolation on that one. When you're dead, you don't know you're dead. It's only difficult for your family. And when you're stupid, it works the same way. And so, one of the things that humans fear most is death. Okay, and Ernest Becker, you should read his book, Denial of Death, because it's what drives a lot of us. And Bill Clinton famously read Denial of Death on his honeymoon. Go figure. But the point is that we fear death, and yet death is nothing to be feared, because after you're dead, it doesn't matter a lot to you and your current consciousness. And I actually made my father live 8 years longer, because he was once he got a scratch from a cat, and he got infected, and it caused his chest to double in size. And he was a relatively small man, probably never weighed more than 160 or 170 pounds, but when he had that scratch, he almost died, and he was in the hospital for several weeks, and he went down to something like 110 pounds, and I moved him once, and it was like picking up a skeleton, and so I placed the skeleton into his bed, and then I look up at him, and he had this grim face on him. You know, his face was very grim. And I said, "Dad, what are you worried about?" And he says, "Well, I'm worried about kicking the bucket." And I said, "Well, don't worry about that. We've had 100 billion people try it. We got no complaints. Just worry about what you're going to do between now and then." And Dr. Jung was very emphatic that you have to live this life. Don't put off living until the next life, because you're likely to, well, you won't be disappointed, but it won't be what you think. And, we don't have any complaints from any of the Muslim martyrs who died thinking that they were going to be put in the lap of 72 virgins, but, give me a break. So, anyway, I don't think Dr. Jung was too worried about death per se, but he did write this one essay, which I'll probably get to sometime in the next couple of months. Yes, you're right, Sophia. He did speak about life and death on video, so I urge you to go take a look at that and hear it directly from the master's mouth, because I'm just riffing on my own personal experience and views, and I am not representing Carl Jung here exactly. So anyway, I think I will at this point wrap this up, because we have been going for quite a time, and let's see, it's 2 hours, so it's time to wrap this up. I will continue with this essay, which the essay itself is called The Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious, and it is addressing the anima, the shadow, and the old man archetypes in particular, and these are all archetypes from the collective unconscious. I have 3 more segments of this essay to read, and so I'm ultimately going to create a playlist about the collective unconscious, which will have this, and we'll have the definition video, and we'll also have my videos about AOC and Beto O'Rourke. Let's see. Info Overdose says, thoughts on atheism. Well, my thought on atheism is there's no such thing. What Dr. Jung did establish in 50 years of clinical work is that the deepest archetype in the unconscious is the self, which he called the God image. And he also said that we human beings can't tell the difference between the God image and the metaphysical God. And so if you think you're an atheist, it's only because you've created some God that isn't one of the traditional ones of religion, but it might be materialism. And so then I have this answer to you, if that's what you've done, if you think you're an atheist. Let's see if I have the picture here right handy. Yes, here it is. Okay, so this is what happens with materialism. Okay, there's never enough, and so this is a 63-foot motor yacht, and as you see, it hasn't made its owner happier, because the owner is not on this boat out in the Chesapeake Bay. The boat is quite lonely, and it's tied up at the dock. And the problem is, when you own a boat, the first thing you think is, I need a bigger boat. And the bigger, you can have a big yacht, but, one of the founders of Microsoft, I don't remember which one, but, he had a 450-foot yacht, but he died, so did that make him happier? Not much more than my rowboat made me when I first got a rowboat. So if your self is driven by materialism, you're going to find it empty at the end of the line. The point is, okay, we have a car outside in the driveway here, and some of my neighbors have Mercedes, and would I be happier in a Mercedes? Well, actually, no, because I think they're kind of uncomfortable. But besides that, Mercedes takes oil just like my car does, and I get 55 miles to the gallon, and so I'm pretty happy with my car, and I don't need to throw an extra $100,000 at the car dealer to be happier. And so Sophie says, I think Jung was a man of centuries. He didn't like being in this box of no beginning and no end. His dreams spanned prior and future times. Absolutely. And that's what you get. If you look at the homepage of this YouTube channel, you'll see right near the top Jung's Red Book for Our Time. If you haven't listened to the first two videos of that, I urge you to do so. It's one essay by Dr. Thomas Arst. He's actually a physicist. He's not trained Jungian analyst in the traditional sense. He doesn't work as an analyst, but he basically summed up the value of Carl Jung in many ways, and I read that entire essay in these two videos that are on the front page of the channel, and so I urge you to take a listen to them, because then you will have a sense of how Jung is really a man for the ages. And even though the psychological community has tried to push him out, because medical psychology wants to just give you pills and that'll make you better, and I'm doubtful, considering we had 72,000 people in the United States die of drug addiction last year, so I'm very skeptical. But anyway, our health insurance industry wants mental health to be handled by pills, and that's not the way to get there, in my opinion. And the theologians tried to keep Jung out because their rice bowl is being theologians, so they want to be the mediator between you and God, or the God image. And so as long as they're the mediator between you and the God image, it might be fine in some ways, and you keep them in business by your donations and the collection plate. Nothing wrong with that. And Dr. Jung said that we shouldn't be destroying anybody's religion because they're all true. But if you're going to have an actual experience with God, that has to be a religious experience. And if you don't understand what that is, then there's a playlist on this channel called Breakthroughs to the Unconscious. And I urge you to listen to that playlist, because I have luckily, very luckily, caught a couple of my own religious experiences on either video or in photographs, and they won't be the same to you because you have to get your own, but at least they'll give you a sense of what I'm talking about. He was truly a great man, says Sophia. Info says happiness is found in meaning, absolutely. And happiness is just a side effect, of meaning, yes. What is the essay called? What essay were we talking about? I'm sorry. If you're talking about the rebirth essay, that's called, let me just get it for you. It is called Concerning Rebirth. And it gives forms of rebirth, the psychology of rebirth, there's a lot of interesting. The subtitles are Experience of the Transcendence of Life, Experiences Induced by Ritual, Immediate Experiences, Subjective Transformation, Enlargement of Personality, Change of Internal Structure, Identification with a Group, Identification with a Cult Hero, Magical Procedures, Technical Transformation, and Natural Transformation, Individuation. And then another subtitle is A Typical Set of Symbols Illustrating the Process of Transformation. And let me just see what they are here. Well, he didn't actually put them in the book, though, so he's describing them. So anyway, that's the rebirth essay, and it's in volume 9I of the collected works of C.G. Jung. 9-2I is Ion, so it's a two-part set of work. Oh, what's the essay called? It's called Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, which is also the main title of the book. It's called Jung's Red Book for Our Time, and I don't have it right here, so I don't want to get up, but it's if you look at any of those videos, you'll see me holding it up in those videos. And so there's across the page on the main page of this channel, you'll find, I think the second group across, you'll see Jung's Red Book for Our Time, and listen to number 1 and number 2, and you'll be on your way, because that is a profound and brilliant essay that really talks about what our current situation is in postmodernism, and actually many of the topics that Jordan Peterson talks about, although in a much more profound way and in an appropriately Jungian way. And the essay is by Dr. Thomas Arst, which is Dr. Thomas Arst. And Dr. Arst has told me that volume 3 of that series is about to drop. We should start to see it in the next week or two, and I'm looking forward to that very much. That's really a valuable set of books. There's 2 volumes so far, and there's going to be 2 more volumes, apparently, volume 3 and volume 4. And so volume 3 is about to come out in April 1st, I think, is what he told me. Okay, I'm going to call it quits. We've been going for 2 hours and 13 minutes, so that means I've been doing all the talking. I need to take a break. So I'll see you again maybe tomorrow. Thank you for joining me today.